A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at our podcast backend the other day, Herman, and I realized how much I genuinely dislike the process of just existing in a modern CMS, or content management system. I had to click through 6 different screens, wait for 3 different loading spinners, and navigate a nested sidebar just to fix a single typo in a show note. It feels like we are living in the Stone Age of digital management, where we have to navigate these elaborate visual mazes just to perform basic administrative tasks. It is incredibly inefficient.
It is a massive waste of cognitive load, corn. We have built these elaborate graphical user interfaces because, for 30 years, that was the only way a human could communicate complex intent to a machine without writing code. We needed buttons, sliders, and checkboxes because we didn't have a common language with the silicon, but we are moving past that now. The visual interface was a bridge, but the bridge is starting to feel more like a barrier.
Today's prompt from Daniel is about using the Model Context Protocol, or MCP, to essentially kill the admin dashboard entirely. He is actually using it right now to build what he calls admin MCPs that act as a headless conversational backend for this very show. He can create episodes, edit metadata, or even delete files just by talking to the system. No dashboard, no login screens, no clicking.
I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been obsessed with this specific shift since Anthropic open-sourced the protocol back in late 2024. Most people are still stuck in the mindset that MCP is just a collection of little tools, like a weather plugin or a simple way for an AI to read a local file. But Daniel is hitting on the real revolution here. We are moving from tool use to full system control. We are talking about a fundamental architectural shift in how software is managed.
It is the difference between giving an AI a screwdriver and giving it the keys to the entire factory. If every system with an API or application programming interface, whether it is a blog, an enterprise resource planning system, or an invoicing platform, can be wrapped in an MCP server, why do we even need buttons anymore? Why am I spending my morning looking at a React-based dashboard when I could just tell my agent what needs to happen?
The short answer is, we don't need them. The visual backend is essentially a translation layer for humans. It takes a complex database and turns it into something our eyes and fingers can interact with. But an LLM, or large language model, doesn't need a button. It needs a schema. It needs a structured way to understand what actions are available and what the current state of the world is. When you wrap a REST API in an MCP server, you are providing a standardized way for the model to reason about the system. You are giving the model a map of the factory instead of just a single tool.
But I have to play devil's advocate here, Herman. Isn't there a massive risk? I can see the headline now. AI deletes entire company database because it misunderstood a conversational command. When I am looking at a dashboard, I can see the delete button is red. I can see the confirmation modal. I know exactly what I am clicking. How do we get that same level of certainty and safety in a conversational interface where the button is just a sentence?
That is where the architectural shift is so important. In a traditional setup, the safety is in the UI or user interface. The developer puts a "Are you sure?" pop-up on the screen. In an agentic setup using MCP, the safety has to move from the interface into the protocol and the server logic itself. This is a much more robust way to handle security. MCP has built-in mechanisms for things like sampling and resource tracking. When an agent wants to perform a high-stakes action, the MCP server doesn't just execute it blindly. It can trigger a mandatory human-in-the-loop confirmation. It is not just the AI shouting into the void, it is a structured handshake between the model and the host application.
I think about the sheer amount of money spent on internal tools. There are entire companies, billion-dollar companies, whose only product is helping other companies build internal dashboards more easily. If I can just point a model at my existing API and say, here is the MCP definition, go manage my users, those internal tool companies are going to have a very difficult time justifying their existence. We are talking about the end of the internal tools team as a concept.
The industry adoption right now is still very skewed toward read-only functions. If you look at the data from early 2026, maybe 15% of current MCP implementations are actually doing state management or write access. Most people are still just using it to fetch data, like read this file or search this database. But once you realize that an LLM can maintain a complex mental model of your system state through a protocol like MCP, the dashboard starts to feel like a tether. It is a bottleneck that slows down the speed of thought.
It reminds me of what we discussed back in episode 855 about the agentic internet. We talked about how the web is shifting from being a place where humans browse to a place where agents perform tasks. This is the back-end equivalent of that. If the front end of the internet is becoming machine native, the back end has to follow suit. Otherwise, you have this incredibly fast agentic layer hitting a brick wall of slow, human-centric administrative processes. It is like having a Ferrari, but you have to stop every 10 feet to manually open a gate.
The efficiency gains are where this gets really compelling, especially in an enterprise context. Think about onboarding a new employee. Currently, you have to give them access to 10 different dashboards, show them where the buttons are, and hope they don't break anything. In an MCP native world, you give their agent access to the company's admin MCP servers. The employee just says, I need to generate a report for the fourth quarter sales in the Northeast region, and the agent handles the cross-system coordination. The employee doesn't even need to know what the ERP looks like. They don't need to know if it is SAP or Oracle or a custom SQL database. The interface is irrelevant.
You are describing a world where software is invisible. We have spent decades making software more visible, more colorful, and more intuitive to the eye. Now we are saying the ultimate user experience is the absence of an interface. It is a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
You are certainly on the right track. The interface becomes the intent. When we look at the technical mechanism, MCP uses JSON RPC over standard input and output or over HTTP. It is incredibly lightweight. It allows for things like server-to-server communication where one MCP server can actually call another. Imagine a podcast management MCP that notices an audio file is missing and automatically calls a storage MCP to recover it, then pings a notification MCP to tell us it is fixed. All of that happens without a single dashboard being opened. It is a self-healing, self-managing infrastructure.
I can see you getting excited about the schema side of this. You've always said that the person who controls the schema controls the world.
It is the truth. If you look at how we used to build these things, we would spend months on the front-end design. We would argue about button placement and hex codes. With MCP, the most important part of your development cycle is how well you describe your tools to the model. You are writing for a different kind of user. You are writing for a reasoning engine. If your tool description is vague, the agent will hallucinate or fail. If your description is precise, the agent becomes a god-tier administrator. The documentation is the interface.
Let's talk about the second-order effects. If we move to this conversational back-end model, what happens to the role of the system administrator? Does that job just disappear, or does it turn into something more like a prompt engineer for infrastructure? I worry about the human element here.
It becomes governance. Instead of clicking buttons, the administrator is setting the guardrails. They are defining the policies that the MCP servers must follow. They are auditing the chat logs and the execution traces. It is a shift from manual labor to oversight. We actually touched on this a bit in episode 1122 when we talked about machine-native communication. When machines talk to each other, the human's job is to be the architect of the conversation, not a participant in every single exchange. You aren't the pilot anymore, you are the air traffic controller.
I am curious about the technical debt here. We have millions of legacy systems running on old Java backends or ancient SQL databases. Is it really as simple as wrapping them in an MCP route? It sounds a bit too good to be true.
In many cases, yes. That is the beauty of it. You don't have to rewrite your database. You don't have to migrate your data to a new cloud provider. You just have to build a small middle layer that translates the MCP protocol into your legacy API calls or even direct database queries. It is much easier than building a new modern web dashboard for an old system. You are essentially giving your 20-year-old ERP a modern agentic brain without touching the core logic. It is the ultimate legacy system upgrade.
That is a huge selling point for enterprise. They hate migrating, but they love efficiency. If you tell a CEO they can keep their old system, but their employees can now manage it via voice or text, that is a winning pitch. But let's look at the flip side. Is there a danger of losing the big picture when you don't have a visual dashboard? Sometimes, seeing a chart with a downward trend tells you more than a text summary ever could. Our eyes are very good at pattern recognition in a way that text processing isn't always.
That is a valid point. I think we will see a split. We will have observation dashboards for data visualization and action interfaces that are entirely conversational. You use your eyes to understand the problem through a high-level visualization, but you use your voice or text to fix it. The era of the CRUD dashboard, create, read, update, delete, is what is really under threat. We don't need a table of 1,000 rows to delete 3 specific users. We just need to tell the system who they are and why they need to be removed.
I like that distinction. Keep the charts for the humans, but give the controls to the agents. It makes me wonder about the software development lifecycle. If I am a junior developer today, should I even bother learning how to build complex admin panels? Should I be spending my time on CSS and React, or should I be diving deep into protocol design?
I would tell them to focus on API design and protocol implementation. If you can build a robust, secure, and well-documented API, you can wrap it in anything. But the days of spending 50% of your sprint building a custom table component for the internal admin tool are numbered. That is work that adds zero value to the end user. It is just overhead. The future is about making your data and your functions accessible to reasoning engines.
It is basically the death of the internal tools team as we know it. One thing Daniel mentioned in his prompt was that current industry perception is very limited. Why do you think people are sleeping on this? Why is it still just seen as a plugin system for ChatGPT or Claude?
It is a failure of imagination. People see a new tool and they try to fit it into their existing workflow. They think, oh, I can use this to let Claude see my calendar. They don't think, I can use this to replace my entire calendar application's interface. It takes time for people to realize that a protocol isn't just a feature, it is a foundation. When the browser first came out, people thought it was just a way to view academic documents. They didn't realize it would become the operating system for the entire world. MCP is at that same stage.
We are seeing that same shift with MCP. It is the operating system for the agentic era. I want to go back to the podcast example. Daniel is using this to manage our episodes. If I want to change the title of this episode after we record it, I don't go to a website. I just tell the show's agent, hey, change the title to something more catchy. The agent then calls the MCP server, which validates that I have the authority to make that change, and then hits the database. It feels like magic, but it is just good architecture.
And the important part there is the validation. The MCP server knows who you are. It knows the context of the request. It can even check if the new title meets our length requirements or our SEO standards before it ever touches the database. This is way more powerful than a simple web form that just accepts whatever you type into a box. It is an intelligent gatekeeper.
It also solves the problem of mobile management. Managing a complex backend on a phone is a nightmare. Tiny buttons, menus that don't scale, login timeouts, but talking to an agent on your phone is the most natural thing in the world. You could be walking your dog and say, hey, archive those 3 episodes from last month, and it is done. You don't have to wait until you are back at your desk.
That is, the briefing gateway concept we talked about in episode 558. Ending that era of being pecked by ducks by constant small administrative tasks. If you can handle those tasks through a quick voice command while you are doing something else, your productivity doesn't just increase, your stress levels go down. You aren't constantly thinking about the 6 tabs you have open that you need to get back to. You are closing the loop in real time.
Let's talk about the model context part of the name. Why is that specific phrasing so important? Why isn't it just called the Agent Tool Protocol?
Because the protocol is about providing the model with the right context at the right time. It is not just a blind command. The model can query the MCP server to say, tell me more about these episodes before I archive them. The server provides that context. It is a two-way street. The model isn't just an executor, it is a collaborator that has a deep understanding of the system it is managing because the protocol allows it to explore that system dynamically. It is about the model's awareness of its environment.
That is a key difference from traditional automation. If I write a script to delete episodes, it just does exactly what I told it to do, even if I made a mistake. If I tell an LLM to do it via MCP, and it sees that one of those episodes is our most popular one of all time, it might say, "Are you sure? This episode has 50,000 downloads and is still trending." That kind of reasoning is only possible because of the context provided by the protocol. It adds a layer of common sense to administrative tasks.
It is a higher level of abstraction. We are moving from how to what. In the dashboard era, you have to know how to find the episode, how to select it, and how to trigger the delete function. In the MCP era, you just say what you want to happen, and the system figures out the how based on the protocol definition. The cognitive burden of knowing the how is shifted from the human to the machine.
I can see some of our more conservative listeners being a bit skeptical about giving this much power to an AI. And honestly, I get it. We are pro-innovation, but we are also pro-accountability. How do we ensure that this doesn't lead to a complete lack of transparency? If there is no dashboard, how do I know what is actually happening in my company? How do I audit an invisible system?
Transparency actually increases. Think about it. A dashboard is a snapshot. It shows you what is happening right now, but it doesn't tell you why. But an agentic log is a narrative. You can ask the system, show me every action taken in the last 24 hours and the reasoning behind each one. You get a full audit trail in natural language. That is much more transparent than trying to decipher a database transaction log or a series of button clicks. You can ask, why did you delete that user, and get a coherent answer.
I see what you mean. It is the difference between a receipt and a story. I'd much rather read a story of why my inventory is low than look at a spreadsheet and try to guess. It makes the why as accessible as the what.
And from a security perspective, you can implement much more granular permissions. You can tell the MCP server that Korn is allowed to change titles, but only Herman is allowed to delete episodes. The model respects those boundaries because they are baked into the protocol's server-side logic. It is not just relying on the AI to be good. It is hard-coded into the tools the AI is allowed to use. It is security at the capability level.
So, for the developers listening who are currently building a React dashboard for their company's internal use, what is your advice? Do they stop what they are doing? Do they pivot immediately?
I would say start by building an MCP server alongside your dashboard. Treat the MCP server as your primary way of interacting with your own API. Use it yourself for a week. See how much faster you can get things done. Once you realize the power of it, you will naturally start to care less about the visual dashboard. The goal should be schema first, development. If you build a great schema, the interface is basically free. You are building for the future instead of polishing the past.
And what about the business owners, the ones who are paying for these dashboards?
They should be asking their teams why they are spending money on visual interfaces that only a few people will ever use. They should be pushing for agentic compatibility. If your software doesn't have an MCP server, it is going to be seen as dark software in a few years. It will be software that the company's AI agents can't see or interact with, which makes it a liability. It is like having a department that refuses to use email.
Dark software. I like that. It is like having a library where all the books are locked in a safe and nobody has the combination. It doesn't matter how good the information is if nobody can get to it. It is a stranded asset.
This is really about the democratization of system management. It used to be that you had to be a power user to navigate complex backends. You had to know the shortcuts and the hidden menus. Now, anyone who can express a clear intent can be a power user. That is a massive shift in how organizations will function. It levels the playing field and removes the gatekeeping of technical complexity.
It also means we have to be much better at expressing our intent. If the interface isn't there to guide us, we have to know what we want. We have to be precise with our language.
That is the new skill set, clear communication, which, ironically, is what Daniel does for a living in technology communications. He is ahead of the curve because he understands that the most important API in the world is human language, provided it is backed by a protocol like MCP that can translate that language into action. We are returning to the importance of the liberal arts in a highly technical world.
It is a remarkable evolution. We went from command lines to graphical interfaces, and now we are going back to a command line, but one that actually understands what we mean instead of just what we typed. It is the command line for the rest of us.
It is a full circle, but this time the computer is meeting us halfway. We don't have to learn its language, it has learned ours. And MCP is the bridge that makes that possible without sacrificing the structure and safety that enterprise systems require. It is the best of both worlds.
I think we've really hit on the core of why this matters. It is not just a cool new way to call a function. It is a fundamental change in the relationship between humans and the systems they manage. The dashboard was a crutch, and we are finally learning to walk without it. It is about agency in every sense of the word.
I'm excited to see where Daniel takes this with the podcast management. Maybe by next month he won't even have to prompt us. The MCP server will just look at the news, see what is trending, and tell the agents to generate a script. It could automate the entire production pipeline.
Let's not go that far, Herman. I still like having a job. I like the human element of our conversations.
Fair enough. But the administrative part of your job, the part where you fix typos and manage files, that is definitely on the chopping block, and I think we should all be celebrating that. We should be spending our time on the ideas, not the logistics.
I am definitely celebrating one less password to remember, and one less menu to navigate. This has been a deep dive into something that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about very soon. It is the quiet revolution happening in the back end.
They will, and they will probably be talking about it through an MCP-powered conversational interface. The revolution will not be televised, it will be prompted.
Let's wrap this up with some practical takeaways. If you are a developer, go check out the MCP documentation. It is surprisingly accessible. Wrap one of your legacy AP endpoints in an MCP server this week, just to see how it feels. And for everyone else, start thinking about the tools you use and ask yourself, could I do this better if I just told an agent to do it?
The answer is almost always yes. The friction we've accepted as normal is actually a choice.
Thanks for the deep dive, Herman. You really brought the fire on this one. I feel like I need to go delete some dashboards now.
It is easy to be enthusiastic when the technology is this transformative. It is not every day we see a protocol that has the potential to wipe out an entire category of legacy software. We are witnessing the extinction of the button.
Very true. Before we head out, we have to say thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure we don't break the actual back end.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. They make the agentic era possible for us and for many others.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this exploration of the death of the dashboard, find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and all the ways to subscribe. We will be back soon with another prompt from Daniel.
See you then.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow